They said he was just some guy in costume, stolen valor, a cosplayer, a faker in a surplus uniform walking too proudly down the street. That's what the woman muttered when she passed him outside the bakery, clutching her purse like he was the threat. He didn't respond, just nodded politely and kept walking, his pressed marine blues immaculate, his chest gleaming with real ribbons earned in heat, blood, and orders barked under night skies. His back was still straight, though he walked with a cane. His beard, clean and white, framed a face weathered like old oak, eyes calm, but tired of seeing too much. And when the cop pulled up and stepped out yelling, hand already on his sidearm, no one thought twice. Not until the flash of polished brass and the glint of silver caught the sun. Not until the police chief arrived and saw who was standing there. Not until everything changed in front of a crowd that would never forget. If you agree that respect shouldn't come with conditions, like and subscribe, because this one matters. It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday. Retired Marine Master Sergeant Victor Rowe had spoken that morning at McKinley Elementary's Veteran Appreciation event, where fifth graders tried to march in crooked lines and teachers wiped tears while he handed out American flag pins. He left early to avoid the chaos of cake and selfies, still in full dress blues, medals aligned in rows, the eagle, globe, and anchor resting firm on his cover beside him in the passenger seat. The streets of Hale, Georgia, were sun-washed and sleepy. His car, a 2008 silver Buick, rolled toward the town square where he planned to grab a sandwich and sit under the old oak by the memorial wall. But just 3 blocks from his stop, flashing lights surged behind him. He pulled over calmly. The officer, a young white cop named Deeks, approached like he'd already decided something dangerous sat behind the wheel. No greeting. No explanation. Step out of the vehicle. Now. Victor raised both hands slowly, his voice even. Officer, is there a problem? But Deeks didn't answer. The tension in his shoulders tightened. His hand hovered near his holster. I set out. Hands where I can see them. A crowd began to form on the sidewalk. A couple from the bakery, teens on bikes, a jogger slowing to a stop. Victor stepped out, slow, deliberate, still calm. His medals flashed in the sunlight, but the officer didn't seem to care. You got ID? Deeks barked. Victor nodded, reaching for the wallet in his jacket pocket. Don't move, the officer screamed, suddenly yanking his gun free and pointing it at Victor's chest. Gasps rang out. A child cried. Phones rose. Cameras rolled. I'm retired military, Victor said, louder now, firmer. This is a uniform. But Deeks didn't blink. You think wearing that makes you untouchable? I've seen people dress like that to scam folks at parades. Look at the medals, Victor said, slowly turning to show his left side. They're real. I earned them. Deeks took a step closer, weapon unwavering. Shut up and get on your knees. And then it happened. Tires screeched behind them. A black unmarked SUV pulled up. The rear door swung open before it stopped rolling, and a man stepped out with authority that didn't need volume. Police Chief Marcus Belton, tall, black, and broad-shouldered, still wore his old army cap like it was stitched to his skull. He walked past the bystanders like they were shadows, eyes locked on the scene ahead. The crowd murmured. Some recognized him from the Memorial Day event, where he laid a wreath beside a man they now realized was this same quiet veteran. Holster that weapon, Belton ordered coldly. Deeks hesitated. Sir, this man's impersonating. He trained me. Belton snapped. In Kandahar. In '08. And if you don't lower that firearm in the next 2 seconds, you're done. Deeks paled. The gun wavered. Chief Belton stepped between them and lowered his voice. Badge. Now. Deeks fumbled. Sir, I thought, that's the problem. Belton's voice cut like a knife. You thought, instead of seeing. You saw a black man in a uniform and assumed it was a costume. He's the reason I survived my second tour. The reason I ever made detective. You just pointed a weapon at a living war hero in front of a crowd. Badge. Gun. Now. The street had fallen silent. Bystanders watched, stunned. Deeks unfastened his badge with shaking fingers, then handed over his firearm. Belton pocketed them both without another word. He turned to Victor, saluted crisply. Victor returned it, slow and steady. You okay, Top? Belton asked. I'm fine, Victor said. I've been through worse. But his eyes watered, not from fear, not from shame, but because he'd gotten used to being invisible. And today, finally, someone had seen him. Someone had stopped it. Around them, the silence broke. Whispers turned to conversation. People stepped closer, not to record, but to say sorry, to ask questions, to finally listen. And Victor Rowe, 68 years old, 3 tours behind him, a Purple Heart in a shoebox back home, and a Silver Star he never told anyone about, stood a little taller. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because in that moment, respect came not from command, but from recognition. And this time, it echoed. The silence after a gun lowers is always heavier than when it's drawn. It lingers like smoke, like regret, like shame that forgot to wear a badge. And that's what filled the air as Officer Deeks stood motionless, stripped of both his weapon and whatever authority he thought his uniform had given him. And while the onlookers watched, still breathless from what nearly happened, Chief Marcus Belton didn't waste another word. He turned to the nearest bystander, a teenager with a phone trembling in his grip, and simply said, "Email me that footage, son," then glanced back at Victor Rowe, whose eyes hadn't blinked once during the entire confrontation, like a soldier reading terrain, waiting for the shot that didn't come. But now, even Victor looked stunned, not because a gun had been pointed at him. He'd stared down worse, but because someone had stepped between him and the barrel, not after it fired, not in a news article or apology letter, but in real time, in front of everyone, and that kind of loyalty, well, he hadn't felt that since his last deployment nearly 2 decades ago. "You all right, Top?" Belton asked again, this time softer, but with that same steel they used to share across command tents and midnight briefings. Victor exhaled like he'd been holding it for years. "Yeah," he said, "but that kid over there saw the whole thing," and he nodded toward a freckle-faced girl still clutching a milkshake, eyes wide, her other hand clutching a small flag from the school event earlier that morning. "Then we'll make sure she sees what happens next," Belton replied, turning back to Deeks with the kind of stare that burns through reputation. "You will never work in uniform again. Internal Affairs will pick you up within the hour. The only report you need to fill out now is a resignation letter," and Deeks, flushed and fidgeting, opened his mouth to argue. But something about the growing crowd, veterans with unit patches, old men with ball caps, teens with camera phones, and mothers holding hands a little tighter, froze him in place. Because even if he couldn't feel shame, he could see it reflected back in every single face around him. Someone whispered, "That's him." And another said, "You know he served under Langston, right?" And suddenly it wasn't just a crowd, it was a witness. One that wasn't going to forget. Chief Belton pulled Victor aside gently and waved down a patrol cruiser. "I'm not having you walk home after that," he said. "Let me take you myself." And as Victor eased into the passenger seat of the cruiser, after years of avoiding them, the hush in the crowd turned into claps, quiet at first, but then rippling down the sidewalk, not the loud, forced kind, but the kind that comes from realizing too late that they'd almost watched a good man die for the second time in his life. And as they pulled away, the rearview mirror filled with people still watching, phones, still recording, but now not to expose something horrible, but to remember what accountability looked like in broad daylight. On the ride to the station, Victor barely spoke, staring out the window at a town that hadn't seen him in uniform in years, not like this, and Belton didn't press. Just drove in silence until they pulled up to the precinct, where things had already begun to ripple. The footage had hit internal networks. The mayor had called twice, and the council chair had left a voicemail, saying, "We're going to need a response plan." But Belton wasn't interested in plans, he was interested in truth, and he made sure the station understood it the moment they walked through the door. "This man is a decorated Marine, a public speaker at our schools, and a combat-tested leader who trained half the force that's still breathing. Any officer who doesn't greet him by name will be retrained or replaced," he said firmly, then turned to Victor and added with a half-smile, "I've got an idea, if you're not too tired." And Victor tilted his head, curious. "We've got cadets starting next week," Belton continued, "and they're great with guns, great with tech, great at quoting the manual. But they have no clue what dignity looks like. I want you to show them." Victor paused. Then he chuckled, low and dry. "I'm not great with speeches anymore." Belton grinned. "That's why you're perfect. You don't need to speak. They just need to watch you walk through the room. That'll teach them more than the whole academy ever could." Victor didn't answer right away, but he did something else. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old coin, a challenge coin from his last unit, its edges worn smooth, and placed it on the desk. "I'll think about it," he said. "But if I say yes, they're not getting a lecture. They're getting a perimeter walk. Sunrise. Every day, rain or not." Belton leaned back. That's the most Marine thing I've heard all month. Outside, the town was still buzzing, and the footage was still climbing. But inside that station, something deeper was shifting. Not just policies or press releases, but the way younger officers were already looking at Victor as he passed. Less like a relic, more like a compass. And for the first time in a long time, Victor didn't feel like the war had followed him home. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he brought something home from the war that people still needed to see. The headlines came and went. Hero Marine wrongfully targeted. Police chief responds in real time. Town veteran nearly shot in uniform. But Victor Rowe didn't chase headlines, didn't read the articles, didn't scroll through the social media takes or the think pieces that cropped up like mushrooms in the wake of the footage. He wasn't interested in being the center of a storm. He'd been that before, under a different kind of fire, in a place that didn't offer do-overs. But what mattered more than any viral moment was what came next. And what came next wasn't a medal or a ceremony, but a seat in the back of the Hale Police training room, where a dozen fresh recruits sat bolt upright in their pressed uniforms, pretending they weren't sweating through their undershirts while Victor, in a plain black t-shirt and ball cap that said Semper Fi, walked slow circles around them like he was still inspecting parade formations in Ramadi. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture, just asked a single question: which one of you would have drawn on me? And the silence that followed was colder than any shout. He let it hang, let it sink in, then finally said, "Good. You're not sure. That's where it starts," and walked out without another word, leaving behind a classroom of young officers who would never forget the weight of not knowing. Within a week, the town had voted unanimously to launch a civilian-military liaison board, with Victor as its honorary lead, and by the end of the month, his face was painted in silhouette on the memorial wall in Hale Square, not as a symbol of survival, but as a reminder. Respect isn't granted by protocol. It's earned in how you choose to see people. And slowly, the town began to change. Shopkeepers greeted him by name now. Kids at crosswalks asked for stories. And even the same bakery where he'd once been called a cosplayer now kept his favorite sandwich on the menu. The sergeant's lunch, handwritten on the chalkboard. But the change wasn't just local. National papers picked up the story, then military blogs, then command centers overseas. One day, an envelope arrived from Quantico, stamped with the seal of the commandant's office. It contained a handwritten note. "You served with distinction, Sergeant Rowe. And on that sidewalk, you served again. Semper Fi." He didn't frame it. He slid it inside the shadow box that still sat unopened since his wife passed, beside the silver star she used to polish with a soft cloth every Memorial Day. And then, a year to the day after it happened, the Hale Police Department held a quiet sunset event. Not a ceremony, not a media stunt, just a moment. The police chief handed Victor an old, worn patrol badge that had belonged to Marcus Belton's father, a local officer who died in the line of duty back in '82. "He would have wanted someone like you to have it," Belton said, voice thick, and Victor didn't refuse it. He just took it with both hands, like it weighed more than steel. Then came the moment that caught everyone off guard. Victor turned to the new cadet class, who stood at attention at the back of the crowd, and simply said, "I don't need applause. I need you to remember. So here's how you remember. Every day, when you clock in, ask yourself who you're about to protect. And if your answer doesn't include the people who look like me, you need to turn back around and try again." And not one person blinked or spoke or even breathed too loud, because truth doesn't need volume. It needs gravity. And in that moment, gravity had a voice. After the crowd thinned, after the sun dipped low and the air cooled into something quieter, Victor sat back down on the bench beneath the memorial oak, same bench where he would have eaten his sandwich that day, if a gun hadn't been drawn first, and pulled out a small envelope from his jacket. Inside was a photo of his old unit, dusty boots, crooked smiles, dessert behind them. And he looked at it like you look at a campfire, warm but distant. "Still here," he whispered, not to anyone, but to all of them. And if you were there, if you passed that square late that night, you would have seen a man who once stood between war and home now sitting between memory and peace. And though he wore no uniform that day, there wasn't a soul in that town who didn't know exactly who he was. And more importantly, who they almost lost. And that, more than any medal or mural, was what finally made it right.